Hello beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I have Robert here again. He was on the previous one which was about the CBT. In today's video we're going to talk about the OSCE exam. So I'd like Robert to introduce himself to new viewers who probably haven't viewed the other video. I'd like him to introduce himself to us.
Well, thank you for bringing me on again. My name is Robert and I'm a Ghanaian registered nurse currently practicing in the UK. I came through the international or otherwise overseas nurse route, and I wrote the OSCE as well.
Okay, so we all know the OSCE is an exam you take after you have passed your CBT in the United Kingdom. So I'd like Robert to explain to us what the OSCE entails and what it's about.
Well, the OSCE is the short form of Objective Structural Clinical Examination, which is the part 2 of the NMC's test of competence. Like we said in the earlier episode where we talked about the CBT, we said the CBT is the part 1 of the NMC's test of competence, which tests your ability to execute certain numerical calculations, or your ability to calculate, and also your ability to execute certain clinical actions in certain or given scenarios or situations. So the OSCE, like the name depicts, it's Objective Structural Clinical Examination. It is purely clinical, and then it tests your ability to undertake certain clinical procedures under various steps and under various guidelines which are set by the NMC of UK.
Okay. So Robert, I'd like to find out who qualifies to write the OSCE. After you've written your CBT, like, what happens? Like,
like we said in the earlier episode, candidates are only able to register for the CBT when they've had their documents verified by the NMC.
Right.
So with the OSCE, you can only write the OSCE here in the UK. So candidates cannot sit for the OSCE in their home countries, unlike the CBT, because the CBT is a computer-based exam, while the OSCE is an objective structural clinical examination. So objective meaning that you'll be assessed objectively. You are going to be assessed by an examiner who will be present the day of examination, and then they are going to assess you based on how well you perform. So the examination can only be done here in the UK. So people who qualify to sit for the exam are people who've passed the first part of the NMC test of competence, which is the CBT, and have gained sponsorship to be in the UK. Or there are some candidates who tend to sponsor themselves to come and sit for the OSCE here in the UK. However, this is a very rare situation. So more of the time, candidates will be required to have sponsorship and then have a visa to enter the UK, and then their prospective employers liaise with the NMC, and then they schedule dates for them to sit for the exam. So all in all, people who have only passed their CBT and are in the UK are only the people who are required or who are allowed to register for the OSCE and also sit for the OSCE.
okay, so if I'm correct, the hospital or care home that is bringing you are the people going to register you?
Yeah, normally most often than not, that's the situation, because cost for the OSCE tends to be a bit expensive. Unlike the CBT, you're talking about hundreds of pounds. So it's more often advisable to be registered. It's more often advisable to be done, or the registration process be done by your prospective employer, due to the cost of it, and also due to the fact that you would be sitting for the exam as a new person here in the UK, and sometimes settling in the UK might be a bit difficult for each one of us. So it's very important that you have your employer doing some of these things for you, because they are quite tedious to go about. Yes, so most of the registrations are going to be done by the prospective employers when you arrive here in the UK.
Okay, so can you kindly tell us the structure of the OSCE?
The OSCE, unlike previous years where I learned it was only 6 stations, now more stations have been added, and people who are going to be sitting for the OSCE now are looking to sit for about 10 stations. Myself, I sat for 10 stations, which include the API and also the skill stations. What this simply means is the API is where you do your assessment on the patient, and then you do your planning, you do implementation, and also you do evaluation. So like I said, nursing is basically the same everywhere. So in our home countries, during our practical exams, there were situations where we were giving patients and then we were asked to assess these patients and then develop a care plan for them, as well as make sure we implement these interventions and also evaluate our care. So it's the same here in the UK. You'll be required to assess your patients, plan their care, and also implement your planning and also evaluate the care you give to the patient and ensure that everything was achieved as well, and also hand over if necessary to a nurse or a doctor. So this is where some candidates will be required to, or every candidate will be required to do a skill or a procedure like drug administration, which would normally be in oral form. So that will come under the implementation aspect, and in the assessment aspect, which I said you will be assessing the patient, and then in the planning you will be required to plan care by bringing up some problems you identify during your assessment, and then you plan a care for this patient to meet these needs or to solve or to rectify these problems you have identified on the patient. And then in the implementation aspect, each candidate will be required to do drug administration, which is normally going to be in an oral form, like I said earlier.
No IVs?
No IVs. IVs tend to come under the skill stations. Yes, IV administration of IV in the NMC's OSCE is an entire skill or an entire procedure on its own. So they tend to put that as an individual or as a skill on its own. So during the implementation aspect, you'll only be required to administer drug orally, and then in the evaluation phase, you'll be required to evaluate the care you give to the patient and then hand over the patient. You might be required to hand over to a nurse, or you might be required to hand over to a doctor. So depending on who you are handing over to is going to determine how you go about with your handover. But whichever person you will be handing over to, you are always going to use the SBAR tool, which stands for the situation, background, assessment, and also your recommendation. So that's basically the structure of the OSCE.
Okay, so now you've explained what the API means and what it is. So what about the skill station? Yeah,
so with the skill stations, like I said earlier, it's 10 stations you are going to be doing, and the API forms, I think 4 of them, assessment, planning, implementation, and evaluation. So you'll be required to do other 6 stations, which will all be skill stations. And the skill stations are divided into 2 stations, where we have the silent stations and then the non-silent stations. So silent stations are where you don't necessarily have to tell the examiner or explain anything to the examiner. All you'll be required to, if you will be required to just write, you just write, and then the examiner will mark whatever you wrote against the marking scheme or the marking criteria they have. And then the non-silent stations are where you'll be required to undertake certain skills, certain clinical procedures, and then while you undertake these clinical procedures, you'll be explaining the rationale behind whatever you'll be doing. Let's say, for instance, you are required to undertake nasopharyngeal suctioning on the patient, and then you come and then you introduce yourself, you sought consent, you've ensured privacy and everything, and then you are undertaking the procedure. It's very important that you let the examiner know that you are going to be using a catheter of, let's say, size 12 or size 10 because, and then you give your rationale for it. You tell the examiner, I'm going to be setting my patient in this position to do this. I'm going to make sure I have my oxygen in place in case my patient starts desaturated. So these are non-silent stations, and then you'll be required to be vocal or verbal in every step you undertake in the procedure. While the silent stations are where, let's say, for instance, you're given a skill to do like oral care, you'll be given a scenario, and then you'll be required to write whatever intervention you'll be doing to meet the patient's oral needs. In this station, you wouldn't be required to necessarily explain whatever you've written. You just have to write, and then the examiner is going to be marking whatever you wrote against the marking criteria. So that's it with the skills as well. So 4 API stations and then 6 skill stations. And in the 6 skill stations, need I note that in these 6 stations, you are going to be doing, they added 2 new stations, which made it 10. And these 2 stations were the professional values and also evidence-based practice. So the evidence-based practice is where you would be required, you'll be given a scenario, and then you'll be required to use evidence-based practice to tackle this scenario, or to write what you would do in this situation. And then professional values is where you will be given some professional misconduct or certain things that are deviations from the normal practice or the right practice, and then you will be required to go back to what the normal professional values of nursing are, and then use that as a guidance or as a tool to, whether if it's with your colleague, then you use that to guide your colleague to do the right thing the next time. So you're basically using the professional values set in nursing to rectify a problem, which is a scenario, and often times they are scenarios that are not in the right framework. They are scenarios that are telling you something about things that are not done right. So you're using the right thing to talk about what's not right, and then making sure you're right. So let's say, for instance, you are told that in the UK it's not allowed for a nurse to be eating patients' food. So we can give you a scenario. Yeah, we can give you a scenario. They can give you a scenario that you met so and so person eating patients' food. As a colleague or as a nurse in charge of the ward, what would you do in this situation? So you use the professional values in nursing to write your answers, and in this station you don't necessarily have to be explaining to the examiner. They are also all silent stations.
Okay, so the evidence base, can you give us an example of an evidence base, like the one you met in your OSCE?
Well, in my OSCE, I remember I wrote, there is this research about ibuprofen and paracetamol, which is about fever in children, and whether or not ibuprofen or paracetamol is more effective, either which of them is more effective than the other in treating fever in children. And then this research will normally talk about various findings in the various researches, and then you as the candidate, you'll be required to write what you think about these researches. So normally it's not something easy to really go about. However, it is something that if you do practice a lot, you will be able to find your way around it, and then make it a bit easier.
So let's say you're newly qualified nurse, you've never worked before, you just came up from nursing school. It'll be difficult for you to actually go through something like that because you have not experienced it.
Yes, that's why I think it's very good that lots of employers or lots of trust and care homes in the UK do provide training for their candidates to prepare them ahead of it, because sometimes you might be caught off guard, and it's very important to be well prepared, and that is where your employer or your employer's training that they put you through or they let you undertake really comes to your aid.
Okay, so for all these scenarios and all that, like what's the time, the duration for this whole nursing procedures and exams and all that?
Well, the duration for the OSCE would always depend on which skill stations you have, because with the API, the APIs have got fixed times to them. All the API have got fixed minutes you are going to be using in each station. In the assessment, there is a fixed time you are going to use in planning, in implementation, and also in evaluation. However, during the skill stations is where the time duration tends to change, because every skill station have got the number of times or the number of minutes allocated to them. So let's say we're both done with our API and then we are going to do our skill stations. If you have nasopharyngeal suctioning, the number of minutes you will be required to use will be different from me, who would be required to, let's say, do intravenous drug administration, or to do something we call the ANTT and wound assessment. So the duration for the OSCE isn't really fixed entirely because of the differential time durations with regard to the skill stations.
Okay, so is there a pass mark?
Well, it's a 10-station examination, and then you'll be required to pass every single station of it. So if you pass 9 out of 10 stations, you'll go back to write.
Oh my, 9!
Yeah, you go back to do the single station as well. So you'll be required to pass every single station before you'll be given the pass mark.
Oh, I see. I thought it was like the CBT. Maybe when you get 14 over 15, they can allow you to go. You need to pass all 10.
No, you could pass 9 stations, and then in a single station you might miss one very critical, stage or step in the procedure, and then you get failed for it, and then you go back and then do the skill again.
Okay, so after you have done the exam, did the examiners tell you that same whether you have passed or you have failed?
Now, normally, with the OSCE, unlike the CBT, there are lots of stations in the UK where you can write, or lots of centers where you can write the OSCE. Myself, I wrote mine in Northern Ireland. That was in Ulster University. There are other centers in Northumbria, Leeds, and then Oxford Brookes. There are various centers. There are various other centers in the UK. So what happens is every center has got the time duration for which they release the results for you.
So it depends on the center.
It depends on the center. So with where I wrote mine, it's normally within 24 hours you're going to get your result, because so you will travel to Northern Ireland, and then on your way back to
England.
In England, you would have your results in the way.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
So if you fail, it's going to be
so it's like that. So with Ulster, you are most likely to have your exam result the following day. However, in other centers, I learned it could take up to 14 working days. Some could take up to 7 working days. So I think that's dependent on when you write.
Anxiety will kill me if I have to wait 14 days for my results. I see. So let's say you did not pass the exam. Like, are you allowed to have an attempt again?
Yeah, you're always allowed an attempt. And with the NMC, they tend to even go ahead and give you a third attempt as well. So with the OSCE, you are allowed 3 attempts per each application. So if you begin your application and then you pass your CBT, you come back, you come to the UK, and then you begin your OSCE preparation, then you sit for the OSCE. Let's say, unfortunately, you don't make it for the first time, you don't make it for the second time, you don't make it for the third time, you'll be required to begin your application again. So they allow only 3 sittings per each application. However, with each sitting, you would only be you would only be allowed to sit for the next sitting if it's not less than 10 days after you wrote your previous one. So let's say you wrote your first exam and then you failed, and then you want to register again. It will have to be after 10 days. You can only sit for the next one after 10 days, 10 days after you wrote your first one. So that's it with the OSCE. You allow 3 attempts, however, per each application. However, you can only write, or you can only sit for the next one if it's been no less than 10 days since you wrote the first one.
Okay. So can you tell us your experience with the exams and how you prepared for it? How did you find it? Like, how was it for you?
So with the OSCE, you are likely to find your employer scheduling trainings for you, either being NHS trust or being care home. You are most likely going to schedule training sessions for you to give you some level of preparation before the exam. Some trusts or some care homes tend to book the exams 3 months after you arrive in the UK, 1 month after you arrive in the UK, 4 months, 5 months, depending on where you find yourself.
So wait, just a question. So before the OSCE, are you going to be like a band 5 nurse or band 4?
That will always depend on your contract with your employer.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
that always depends on your contract with your employer. So what happens is, in my situation, when we arrived in the UK, we sat for our OSCE about 6 weeks after we arrived in the UK. And during this period, we always had OSCE trainings from Mondays. I remember we arrived in the UK on a Friday, and then OSCE training began on the following Monday. We trained up to the day before we traveled to Ireland to have our exam. So we were basically training every day of the week except for weekends.
Rigorous training.
Yes, and during this period was when we were having our personal trainings. We met up in one of our friends' place, and then we will be practicing various close stations and various API, which helped us to also prepare very well ahead of it. So in terms of preparation, that's how we went about it, and it was very useful and it was very good. It helped us in the end.
Was it difficult?
Well, like every examination, it's difficult. Every examination is difficult, no matter the level of preparation you've got. Sometimes you just have to believe in yourself and then do what you were taught, and pray as well, and then everything will definitely go well for you. I think that's what we did, and eventually we all made it.
Okay, so everybody in your group passed.
Yeah, we passed. Everybody's about 5 now, so
that's good to know. Okay, so my final one. What advice would you give to people who want to write the OSCE, or somebody who has failed and have lost hope and is attempting to write again? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I always say this, that if you've begun this process, you began it for a reason. So that reason should always be what's going to push you towards it, no matter the number of hurdles you will have to overcome, or no matter the number of challenges you will have to overcome. You always have to remember why you started it in the first place, and then always keep your head up high, no matter the outcome of what exams you write, because not everybody is going to pass whatever exam at one sitting. Some people are going to have to go again, others will have to go 3 times, but at the end of the day, they say the ends will justify the means. So will you be able to get there? That's what matters. How you got there doesn't really matter, as long as you get there. So if you're able to get there, which sometimes we tend to be reluctant to keep fighting because we might have some failures along the way, but I think my advice I will give to everybody is to keep pushing, and then keep working hard, keep praying, and also keep learning and practicing a lot, and the OSCE is going to be a bit easier for you, although it's difficult. I won't lie to you, but then with very good or very high levels of preparations, and you pray very hard, and then you keep your head up, I think you'll be able to make it in the end.
Okay, so the study materials was provided by the trust, or you had them with your friends, or was a group chat or something?
With us, we had all the materials provided to us by our trust, and then including videos, including printed scenarios, printed handouts, and everything. We had everything handed over to us. So I would say we were fortunate to have all of this, because I know people who didn't have it in their trust or in their care homes. So I would say we are fortunate about that. Yes, I would say we are fortunate. So I think that really helped a lot, and I would like to really help a lot.
So that means I can't get any links for my viewers or any study materials?
There are lots of videos on YouTube. Yeah, there are lots of videos on YouTube, but you just have to know which video you are really watching, and whether that video is really what needs to be done, or there are lots of videos, I would say, but you should really filter what you consume. That's another thing, because you might find lots of videos doing, lots of people in different videos doing different things for the same station or for the same skill, and if you don't really know what you are really doing or what you really want to learn, you might be learning the wrong things. So there are lots of videos on YouTube. However, you need to be really vigilant, and you need to be very you need to really filter what you consume, I would say, just so you don't consume the wrong material.
I've seen a couple myself, so many OSCE trainers on YouTube. I've seen a lot.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of very good OSCE trainers, but then you really need to be sure what you are consuming, and then make sure you are consuming the right thing.
Okay, so to all prospective OSCE candidates, you have heard it from Robert himself. He says if you want to look at any training or learn anything on the internet, you should filter what you study, because some people might make a video of them doing a procedure or doing something, but they're not actually following the right criteria or right way to do it. So you really need to be careful about who you take as your OSCE mentor online and all that. So once again, I'd like to say thank you, Robert, for coming onto my channel.
Thank you.
Yeah, so lovely viewers, this is the end of our video. My name is Jane. If you are new here, please do the needful, subscribe to my channel, like, and leave a comment. Thank you so much. I love you all. Bye bye.